This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, today with a non-Oceanliner video. Have you ever heard of the phrase, "what goes up must come down"? In the brief time that airships were a popular means of air transport, they were involved in numerous incidents that shook the world. These incidents ranged from harmless and amusing to deadly tragedies that forever shook confidence in the validity of the vehicles. And all of them very interesting to study. Here are 5 airship disasters and mishaps from history. Number 5, the Los Angeles, 1927. The USS Los Angeles was a massive Zeppelin given to the United States by Germany as part of war reparations in 1924. She enjoyed a few years of normal service until her incident in New Jersey on the 25th of August, 1927. After being refitted and undergoing repair, the Los Angeles was supposed to conduct an 8-hour flight at 10,000 feet in the air. The airship was docked on the high mast of the Naval Air Station in Lakehurst, New Jersey, preparing for its flight when a breeze blew in from the southeast at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Rather than spinning to face the wind, the breeze began to lift the tail of the airship high into the air. And it kept on rising by its tail, and the men on board were forced to grab hold of the ship's girders to avoid falling over. Suddenly, the ship was standing at a 90-degree angle over its mast. In the engine room at the back of the airship, now high in the air, one of the engineers reportedly shouted, "Holy I can see New York!" Nobody was quite sure what to do, and the commanders of the mast and the airship got into an argument about whether they should disconnect or not. Luckily, as quickly as things had gone wrong, they solved themselves. The ship did a complete flip of the high mast and lowered herself down onto the other side. She was quickly returned to her hangar to be inspected for damage, but nothing had been broken during the incident. The most damage to the airship had occurred inside the cars, where falling tools and objects had crashed into each other. The accident was quickly moved on from and nobody was hurt, and the crew at least left with a story to tell. And a century on from the incident, we can look back at the extraordinary photos of an airship hovering vertically in the air over its naval base and appreciate the pioneering efforts of early aviators who made flight what it is today. Number 4, USS Shendandoah, 1925. The USS Shenandoah was the United States' first attempt at natively constructing an airship that could patrol the seas and skies of the United States. At 680 feet long and with a crew of more than 40, when it was built in 1923, it was one of the largest airships in the United States. It was even the first airship to cross the Atlantic, as well as the first to conduct a transcontinental flight of America. She took part in naval exercises as a scout and was ordered to conduct Arctic exploration, until a tear in her balloon prevented the mission from proceeding. It was a short career, but she was a popular vessel and became a symbol of the Navy, flying all over the country and drawing large crowds of spectators wherever she went. The US government took notice of this popularity, and the Shenandoah was sent on a tour of the United States in 1925. She was to visit 40 cities all across the American Midwest. On the 2nd of September, she set off on her journey, but it didn't take long for things to go tragically wrong on board. The next day, on the 3rd, a sudden storm hit the Shenandoah as she was traveling over Ohio. The storm lifted the Shenandoah, and the change in pressure tore the balloon to pieces. The airship split into 3 and crashed to the ground outside the town of Caldwell. 14 of the crew were killed, either by falling out of the airship while it was being torn apart or when it hit the ground. Remarkably, the rear section of the airship remained aloft, and the 7 men inside managed to remain afloat for some time, despite it being detached from the rest of the airship. The story of the Shenandoah didn't end there, however. This was not merely a deadly crash, but the destruction of an icon of the United States. Naturally then, the looting began almost immediately when the pieces of the ship made landfall. The Department of Justice and the Ohio National Guard tried to secure the site, and over the next few weeks, confiscated over 4 truckloads of materials that had been looted by locals from the wreckage. However, there was simply no way of finding it all. Even the logbook had been taken, depriving investigators of a valuable resource with which they could determine what had happened. Everything from the metal framework to the canvas of the balloon itself was an attractive item to try and grab. And one report even stated that a piece of canvas from the balloon was turned into a lampshade during the Great Depression. Once the looting had stopped, however, the wreck site itself became a tourist attraction, with thousands coming to view the crash, and a small local economy developed around it. Stalls were set up selling soda and water to the tourists flooding into the area. The cause of the crash was investigated jointly by the Army and the Navy, who found 2 reasons. First, the weather conditions around Ohio had been ignored in favour of pulling off a publicity stunt for the military. And 2, the helium inside the balloon was considered too valuable to allow any to waste, and so safety valves had been removed from the airship. This prevented pressure control during the rapid ascent, so safety requirements for airships were changed after this disaster, but airships would not remain in flight for much longer anyway. Now, before we crack on with this list, I wanted to tell you a quick story about my business, Oceanliner Designs, and today's sponsor, Squarespace. This year, my business, Oceanliner Designs, is turning 5 years old, which means that if it were a kid, it'd be able to talk by now, which is kind of scary. I guess 5 years ago, I started my own website with Squarespace, and I've been recommending it to people ever since. Genuinely, I'm not just being paid to say this. I've recommended it to people at parties and meetings and things when they ask what they should use to build a website or what I use to build mine, because it looks really nice. Squarespace is really graphical. The photographs and the images look spectacular. If you wanted to run a blog or give people your personal thoughts or share your artwork or sell products, I can't think of a better platform than Squarespace. I've used it to sell prints now for 5 years, and they look really, really nice on the website. The other thing that's really great are the analytics. Around the world, I can see what countries they're visiting from, I can see what devices they're using to get on my website, and then kind of like change the design accordingly. Another thing that's really great are the blogging tools. I've written articles on Squarespace that have then become scripts that I've turned into videos for my YouTube channel. Again, it's all graphical, the photographs look beautiful. Go give it a try, really recommend it. Make your own website today. Visit the link right here in the description of this video to receive a discount on your first URL or website purchase. When you have made your website with Squarespace, put it in the comments of this video and tag me in it, and I'll go and check it out. Number 3, the LZ-104, 1917. In 1917, the beleaguered troops of German East Africa were fighting a guerrilla war against the British, cut off from their supplies and running desperately low. A resupply mission by sea would be impossible, as the Royal Navy prevented any German ships from reaching so far away. A new plan would be needed, and the answer came in the form of the LZ-104 Airship. Operation China's Snow, as it was called, was launched, in which the LZ-104 would fly from Bulgaria, across the Mediterranean, and over Egypt, making its way south until it could resupply the army. This was to be a one-way mission, and even the fabric that made up the airship's exterior skin was planned to be disassembled and turned into useful material for the army. On the 21st of November 1917, the airship set off from Yambol in Bulgaria, and for several days it sailed through the air, managing to travel through harsh weather and turbulence. Eventually, one of the 5 engines on board seized up, which reduced the airship's speed, and the electronics failed, rendering it unable to send signals, though it could still receive them. Then, over Khartoum, a signal was received from the West African Army, calling off the mission as they had lost control of their landing site. This signal may have actually been faked by the British, but records are unclear. Either way, the ship turned back from its mission and retreated back to Bulgaria. Though the mission was a failure, the LZ-104 managed to set a new record for airtime and distance travelled in an airship, having spent 95 hours in the air and travelled 4,200 miles in total. The celebration, however, was short-lived. The airship began operating out of Yambol, attacking targets across the Mediterranean in bombing raids. On the 7th of April 1918, she attempted to attack the British at Malta. An observing submarine commander reported seeing 2 bursts on board the airship before it was engulfed in a gigantic flame and it nosed down into the water. There were no survivors on board the 21-man crew. And strangely, neither the British nor Italians claimed the kill, and the destruction of the airship is likely the result of an accident on board rather than fire from enemy forces. Number 2, the C-8 Blimp, 1919. The C-class were a type of blimp designed by the US Navy just after the First World War and were very, very simple in their design and function. Unlike a Zeppelin, the C-class did not have a rigid metal frame, but were more like a conventional balloon with a cab slung underneath. 10 of the blimps were completed, and they would go on to have tumultuous lives. On the 2nd of July 1919, the C-8 attempted to dock at Camp Holabird in Maryland. There were many spectators of the event watching the balloon come in, when suddenly something went badly wrong. The blimp somehow spontaneously ignited and loudly detonated above the ground. Fortunately, more than 80 adults and children on the ground were injured in the blast, and the 6-man crew on board the ship was lost. A mile away from the explosion, windows and houses were totally blown out. This would not be the only disaster that the C-class of ships was involved in. Only 2 months earlier, the C-5 had been lost in a gale off the coast of Newfoundland, when it was blown out to sea while attempting a transatlantic crossing. The wind simply picked up the balloon while the ground crew were trying to handle it with ropes, and they lost their grip, and it just floated out to sea, never seen again. 2 years later, the C-3 would catch fire and crash while attempting to dock in Norfolk. Now, the US Navy eventually switched to non-flammable helium gas instead of hydrogen, but this limited the range of their airships, because helium weighs twice as much as hydrogen, and only allowed 93% of hydrogen's lifting capacity. And in the end, the ultimate cause of the C-8's destruction was never discovered, and will remain a mystery. Number 1, USS Akron, 1933. The USS Akron was the world's first flying aircraft carrier, operating with the United States Navy between 1931 and 1933. It was capable of carrying 4 aeroplanes that could be launched from its hold and then used to attack the enemy, before then being recovered through a trapeze mechanism. Though it never saw combat, it was a valuable experiment for the short time it was in service. On the 3rd of April 1933, just 2 years after it had been launched, the Akron cast off on a voyage along the coast of New England. This would be its last journey. The airship left dock at 7:30 in the evening with many distinguished guests on board, including a rear admiral, the commander of the Lakehurst Naval Station, and others. It was intended to be a display of the potential uses of the airship in naval service, but unfortunately, the day she left was also the beginning of a huge storm system that would sweep the American coast. Fog soon rolled in, and within a few hours, the ship had become difficult to control in the wind and rain they had flown directly into. Shortly after midnight, the Akron began a rapid descent into the ocean. The crew managed to eject ballast, which briefly stabilized the height, but it did not last long. The airship quickly began to sink again, this time hitting the ocean tail first. The waves quickly dragged the airship down, and the Akron was lost with almost all on board. Of the 76 men on board the vessel at the time of the crash, 73 died. This makes the Akron the single worst airship disaster in history. And to make matters worse, the rescue efforts also resulted in several dead. As a naval blimp was sent to help search for survivors in the water, the blimp found itself victim of the same stormy conditions, and it also sank, killing 2 of its crew. The reason for the deadliness behind the Akron disaster is that despite sailing over the ocean, there were no life jackets on board the vessel and only a single raft. The reports of survivors indicate that it was not the crash that resulted in the deaths, but drowning and the freezing temperatures of the Atlantic. After this, safety measures aboard airships were changed and all were equipped with life jackets. President Roosevelt gave a speech in the aftermath of the disaster in which he described the national disaster and praised the men lost in the crash as upholding to the end the finest traditions of the United States Navy. Now, the ultimate cause of the disaster is still unknown, but a lot of theories have been put forward about what caused that crazy descent. It's possible that it was simply a downdraft that caused the tail of the Akron to sink into the water, and the whole thing was subsequently pulled down. But it's also possible that the altimeter on board was not properly calibrated for the low air pressure caused by the storm. And given the nearly 800-foot length of the airship and the difficulty in maneuvering such a large vehicle, if the captain thought he was at a higher altitude than he was, the airship's tail might have touched the water when the crew tried to pull up too quickly. The answer will likely never be known for sure. This is one of the many reasons why I don't ever travel in a hot air balloon. I'll stick to good old terra firma. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please think about liking and subscribing to the channel. You can support my channel on Patreon. You'll find the link down in the description. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.